The events that will culminate in the War of Gog and Magog have already begun. Over the past couple of years, we have seen an alliance between Russia and Iran form, and in just the last year we've seen Turkey, which is a member of the Gog Magog alliance, move from the desire to join the EU and the West to being spurned by the EU and turning to Russia and Iran. We've also seen, just in the past year, the leadership of this country completely turn its back on Israel, a situation which even up to a year ago most people would have thought to be impossible, but is now a reality.
In between their rumblings about Israel's alleged planned destruction of Al-Aqsa, the Arab media are increasingly singing Obama's praise as their new champion. The same article from the Arab News that I mentioned earlier prefaced its analysis of U.S.-Israeli relations by praising the new geopolitical reality that they see embodied in President Obama. The writers said, U.S. President Barack Obama has, at least in the public, taken a tough stand against Israel in line with his promise about better relations with the Muslim world. But he's not the only one seeking the curry favor with the Arabs by impugning the Israelis. Surprisingly, in January, the commander of the U.S. Central Command, General David Petraeus, gave a 45-minute presentation to the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff. The central theme of his presentation stunned both the White House and the Pentagon chiefs. According to Petraeus, the perception in the Arab world is that the U.S. is incapable of standing up to Israel. The general said that as a result of America's perceived pro-Israel policies, it was losing support among the moderate Arab states. Then the general dropped the bombshell. He said that American troops in Iraq and Afghanistan were bearing the consequences. In other words, America's relationship with Israel, while important, was not worth the cost in American lives, and it's time to rethink the policy. His comments were unprecedented. No previous CENTCOM commander has ever expressed political foreign policy opinions, especially opinions so devastating to Israel's security. General Petraeus' conclusions were so shocking to many among the Pentagon brass that they decided to go public with elements of the briefing by leaking it to the Foreign Policy magazine. Later, during his visit to Israel that created the recent diplomatic furor, Vice President Joe Biden echoed the Petraeus report. He reportedly told Netanyahu, "This is starting to get dangerous for us. What you're doing here undermines the security of our troops who are fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. That endangers us, and it endangers regional security." The Israeli daily newspaper Yedioth Ahronoth analyzed the exchange this way. The vice president told his Israeli host that since many people in the Muslim world perceived a connection between Israel's actions and U.S. policy, any decision about construction that undermines Palestinian rights in East Jerusalem could have an impact on the personal safety of American troops fighting against Islamic terrorism. Israel got the message. Its ambassador, Michael Oren, quickly responded in damage control interview on CNN. He argued that America's friendship with Israel protected U.S. troops. Oren said that if Israel did not exist, extremists in the region would join al-Qaeda in its anti-American sentiment. He said, "The U.S. is much safer thanks to Israeli-American cooperation." The ambassador protested the Petraeus report, reminding CNN that Israel supplies the U.S. with intelligence and equipment its troops use to fight terrorists. But if Israeli public opinion is any guide, most of them are already reading the handwriting on the wall. Recent polls show that more than 90% of all Israelis think that the Obama administration is more pro-Arab than it is pro-Israel. The message was also clear to the Arab world, and especially to the Islamic jihadists. They interpret it as, "Keep up the pressure, we're winning." Christians, it's time to speak up and protest this grave injustice to God's covenant people. God is not finished with them, but He may be finished with us if we don't speak out.
Along with that, just a few short months ago, oil in Israel was thought to be just a pipe dream, but now Levant Basin gives 122 trillion cubic tons of natural gas and 1.7 billion barrels of oil. USGS Energy Resource Program Coordinator Brenda Pires said Levant's gas resources is larger than anything the survey has ever assessed in the U.S. U.S. experts predict oil and gas rush to Israel. Welcome to Israel. U.S. expert Fred Ziegman sees big names join in an oil and gas rush in Israel. It is this oil and gas, along with the yet discovered oil, that will be the hook in the jaw spoken of in Ezekiel 38. These events have already started to take place, and we are just weeks, possibly months away from this initial war in the Middle East. When this Iranian war by proxy fails, the world will start to demonize Israel around the clock. They will be accused of everything from war crimes due to the holding of prisoners of war to illegally occupying land. At that point, Iran will regroup with Russia. In Ezekiel 38:10, as I mentioned before, we are told, "This is what the Sovereign Lord says. On that day thoughts will come into your mind, and you will devise an evil scheme." I believe this soon coming war is part of that evil scheme, and that Russia is involved on the planning and strategy end of it. When it fails, the hook in the jaw will lead Russia to then commit its military, which will allow Russia and Iran to form a new, much larger coalition of nations that move against Israel in the War of Gog and Magog. It is this War of Gog and Magog that sets the final pieces in place for the beginning of the almost immediately, or at a minimum shortly following, 7-year tribulation period. What I'm about to say, I'm not alone in saying. David Jeremiah, Greg Laurie, Joe Rosenberg, and others have expressed this idea. I believe that wrapped up in the events of Gog and Magog is where we will see the rapture of the church, whether right before or during or right after. We discussed this issue in greater detail in our article about the War of Gog and Magog, and we will be doing a second part of this webcast focusing on the War of Gog and Magog. Being that we are already seeing these events unfold, and Ahmadinejad himself has already told us that this war is likely to happen in spring or summer of this year, we do need to heed Zephaniah's warning and start thinking in terms of Jesus' words given in the Olivet Discourse. If you really want to understand what I mean by that, then please listen to our webcast, The Start of God's Prophetic Clock, and also read our article, Generation Not Time or Date. If this initial war does take place this summer, it is likely we will see the next part of it, which will be the War of Gog and Magog, at some point in mid to late 2011, possibly even early 2011.